A lost city is not always a fantasy. This video is an epic quest for legendary cities described in ancient epics and where archaeology found them. By the end, you will understand how the line between myth and history is far thinner than you ever believed. What if the tale of a golden metropolis was a distorted memory of a real trade hub? Could a monster's labyrinth simply be the floor plan of a magnificent palace? We will bridge the gap between poetic imagination and tangible proof, showing how modern science has turned folklore into fact, revealing the real-world foundations of our greatest legends. What vanished civilization do you hope was real? That storyteller by the fire, holding an audience spellbound for generations, is our first clue. The tale they spin, passed from parent to child across countless lifetimes, becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a vessel for memory, a way to carry the identity of a people across the abyss of time. This is the nature of legend, a shimmering blend of myth and tangible truth. The scholar Mircea Eliade once observed that myth tells only of that which really happened. He wasn't suggesting dragons were real, but rather that the core of these epic narratives is grounded in a people's lived experience, in their triumphs, their losses, and most importantly for us, the places they called home. So when we read of cities with walls that touch the sky or gardens hanging in the air, we are not reading a work of pure fantasy. We are reading an encoded message, a cultural memory preserved in the only durable container available before the written word, the human mind. The description becomes exaggerated, yes, infused with the divine and the miraculous to convey its importance, but at its heart often lies a geographical and historical reality. Think of the immense wealth described in the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, or the impossibly strong fortifications in Homer's Odyssey. To the people telling these stories generations after the fact, a city of great prosperity might indeed be remembered as a city of gold. Sophisticated masonry techniques lost to later generations could easily be recounted as walls built by gods. A river known for precious mineral deposits might, in the grand retelling, become a literal river of gold. This shift in perspective is everything. It transforms our search from a fanciful hunt for fairy tales into a disciplined historical investigation. We are no longer looking for a literal labyrinth containing a minotaur. We are looking for the palace complex so vast and confusing it inspired the legend. We are not searching for a sunken continent called Atlantis. We are searching for a real coastal civilization that suffered a catastrophic natural event, a memory so traumatic it echoed across millennia. The quest becomes an act of translation, peeling back the layers of poetic embellishment to find the plausible, physical world that started it all. What we are really seeking is the moment a place stopped being just a location and started being a story. The most compelling proof that legends can be maps lies on a windswept hill in modern Turkey. For centuries, scholars dismissed the Trojan War as a beautiful fiction, a poetic clash of gods and heroes with no basis in reality. That changed because one man, a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann, read Homer's Iliad not as a myth but as a historical document. Armed with little more than the epic's geographical clues and an unshakable conviction, he arrived at a mound called Hisarlik in the 1870s, convinced the lost city lay beneath his feet. His methods were crude by today's standards, his excavation more like a treasure hunt, but his impact was revolutionary. Schliemann's digs revealed not one city, but many, layered atop each other like chapters in a book. He had found Troy, the specific layer often linked to Homer's tale, known to archaeologists as Troy 7a, shows evidence of a violent destruction by fire and warfare around the 12th century BC, right within the time frame suggested by ancient sources. Here was a powerful, fortified citadel guarding the entrance to the Dardanelles, a narrow strait that was the ultimate Bronze Age toll booth, controlling all sea traffic between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Suddenly, the Iliad's decade-long siege made strategic sense. This was not a fight over a single individual, but a brutal conflict over trade, wealth, and control of a vital maritime corridor. The discovery was a thunderclap that echoed through the halls of academia. It proved that poetic exaggeration could cloak a genuine historical event. The gods intervening from Mount Olympus might be literary flourish, but the anger of Achilles, the cunning of Odysseus, and the grief of a fallen city could very well be echoes of real human experiences, amplified across generations into epic verse. Troy taught the world a fundamental lesson. Ancient stories are not merely fantasies to be enjoyed, but sometimes cryptic records to be deciphered. They can contain seeds of truth about geography, conflict, and cultural memory. This monumental find gave archaeologists permission to take myths seriously, to use them as a starting point for inquiry rather than dismissing them as the endpoint of imagination. It opened the door to searching for other legendary places with a new sense of possibility, turning the pages of epic poetry into potential field guides for discovery. The discovery of Troy rewrote the rules, proving epic poetry could be a guidebook to lost history. Yet another ancient text, far older than Homer, held a different kind of clue, one written not in tales of war, but in hymns to a river. The Rig Veda, a foundational collection of Sanskrit verses composed over 3,000 years ago, sings repeatedly of a mighty, life-giving river named the Saraswati. It is described as supreme among rivers, flowing from the mountains to the sea, the heartland of a prosperous and powerful people. For centuries, scholars in the West viewed this as purely mythological, a sacred metaphor rather than a geographical fact. There was no great river matching that description in the known landscape of northwest India and Pakistan. The Saraswati, it seemed, was a river of legend, lost to time and memory. This dismissal, however, sparked a fascinating detective story, one that would lead not to a single city, but to an entire forgotten civilization. If the river was real, where was its evidence, and what became of the people who thrived along its banks? The search began by looking at the land itself, tracing the ghost of a waterway through satellite imagery and geological surveys. Researchers identified the dry bed of the Gagga-Hakra River system, a seasonal stream today, which once carried meltwater from the Himalayas across the vast plains. The geological evidence suggested this was once a major, perennial river that began to dry up around 4,000 years ago due to shifts in tectonic plates and changing monsoon patterns. The correlation was startling. The description, the timing, and the location pointed to a profound conclusion. The legendary Saraswati was likely this very river, a vital artery that sustained life and then vanished, leaving only its memory preserved in sacred verse. But a river needs cities. If a great civilization flourished on its banks, where were their homes? The answer had been quietly waiting in the dust for millennia. In the 19th century, British engineers laying a railway line in the Punjab region stumbled upon mounds of ancient, finely fired bricks. They used them as ballast for the tracks, unknowingly crushing the ruins of a metropolis. Later, systematic excavations at these sites, named Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, revealed a reality far beyond any expectation. Here was a civilization contemporary with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet utterly unique. Its cities were marvels of early urban planning, built on precise grid patterns with wide main streets and narrow lanes. Homes featured advanced drainage systems and indoor bathrooms, with wastewater channeled into covered sewers. They used standardized weights and measures across a vast region, implying sophisticated trade and administration. There was no evidence of grandiose temples or palaces for god-kings. Instead, the architecture suggested a society focused on civic order and communal well-being. This was the Indus Valley civilization, and its greatest cities lay along the course of the lost Gagga-Hakra, the Saraswati. The connection transforms our understanding. The Rigveda's hymns were not describing a mythical paradise. They were preserving a cultural memory of a real, thriving homeland centered on a great river. The gradual drying of that river, a catastrophe unfolding over generations, would have been a trauma woven into the identity of the people. The mighty Saraswati, once roaring from mountain to sea, became a seasonal trickle and then a dusty scar on the landscape. Its cities were abandoned, their languages and scripts forgotten. In the aftermath, the memory of that lost river and the advanced society it supported was all that remained, growing in symbolic power with each retelling. It became the ultimate lost golden age, a utopian standard against which all later kingdoms were measured. So while you will not find the name Mohenjo-daro in the epics, you find its echo in the descriptions of perfect order and prosperity. This discovery shows us that legend is not always born from war or heroic deeds. Sometimes it is born from environmental loss. A changing climate can erase a river and scatter a people, but the story of that life-giving water and the great civilization it nurtured can endure for thousands of years, waiting for the moment when science and story meet again to reveal the truth beneath the myth. This translation from legend to location is a meticulous science, a discipline of careful deduction. To find a city that vanished from human sight 3,000 years ago, you must become a specific kind of detective, one who reads clues not just in the soil, but in poetry, satellite images, and the very shape of the land. The modern search for these places is no longer a romantic treasure hunt. It is an interdisciplinary puzzle where philology, geology, and technology work in concert to triangulate the truth. The first clue is always the text itself, but reading it requires a special skill. As scholars like David Lewis Williams have emphasized, you must learn the symbolic language of the people who wrote it. What sounds like supernatural fantasy to us was often a coded way of describing the real world. A city said to be at the world's end likely was not floating in a void. It was probably just a very distant trading outpost, the furthest known point on their map. A place described as guarded by a great serpent might be protected by a tribe that used the serpent as its emblem, or perhaps it lay beyond a notoriously winding, snake-like river. The goal is to strip away the layer of divine intervention and heroic spectacle to find the plausible geographical and cultural core. Once you have a translated clue from the text, the search moves into the physical realm. This is where satellite imagery and aerial photography become invaluable. From high above, patterns invisible on the ground emerge. The ghostly outline of an ancient river channel, long since dried up, can be traced across a desert. The faint geometric shadow of buried walls or foundations, known as a crop mark, might appear in a farmer's field, visible only from the air when conditions are just right. These tools allow archaeologists to survey vast areas non-invasively, narrowing the search from an entire region to a handful of promising sites. Then comes the geology. If an epic describes a city destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods, as Plato does with Atlantis, geologists can examine sediment cores from coastal regions. They look for evidence of sudden, catastrophic events like tsunamis or volcanic eruptions that align with the described time frame. They can analyze soil layers for signs of saltwater inundation or rapid burial. This hard evidence either supports the possibility of such an event or gently guides the hypothesis elsewhere. Finally, with all this data converging on a likely location, the traditional dig begins. But even here, the methodology is precise. Finding scattered pottery shards can tell a story of trade networks. The style of a clay tablet or the design on a seal can link a ruin to a specific culture mentioned in the texts. The layout of a city's streets might mirror the confusing description of a labyrinth. Each fragment, from the smallest piece of worked stone to the grandest collapsed gateway, is a piece of evidence tested against the original story. This systematic approach transforms the quest. It turns the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of myth into a series of testable hypotheses. We are no longer asking, is this legend true? We are asking what real-world event, place, or people could have inspired this memory, and can we find its fingerprint in the archaeological record? The romance is not lost in this process, it is deepened. There is a profound thrill in watching a team use soil science to confirm a detail from a 3,000-year-old poem, proving that our ancestors were not just dreaming, they were remembering. The desert holds its secrets close beneath oceans of sand and centuries of silence. Yet sometimes a legend is so persistent, so vividly described across cultures, that it demands to be found. This was the case with a place known by many names: Iram of the Pillars in the Quran, Ubar in Bedouin folklore, a fabled metropolis of towering architecture and unimaginable wealth said to have vanished in a single night as punishment for its pride. For generations, it was dismissed as a moral parable, a desert mirage of the imagination. But the details were too specific to ignore. This was a city built on frankincense, the aromatic resin worth its weight in gold in the ancient world, burned in temples from Rome to Babylon. Its sudden end was described not just as abandonment, but as a cataclysmic swallowing by the earth itself. These were not vague fairy tale elements. They were clues, a geographical and historical fingerprint waiting to be matched. The search became a modern detective story, blending old maps with new eyes in the sky. In the late 1980s and early 90s, a team led by explorer Nicholas Clapp and archaeologist Joris Zarens turned to an unexpected tool: NASA Space Shuttle radar imagery. This technology could penetrate the dry surface sand to reveal the ghostly trails of ancient caravan routes beneath, the very highways of the incense trade. By overlaying these radar maps with historical accounts from figures like the geographer Ptolemy, they saw a pattern converge in the desolate Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Oman. All paths led to a remote well called Shisar. What they found there was a revelation, not a city of glittering towers, but the substantial ruins of an octagonal fortress, a caravanserai and trading hub from which the precious frankincense of southern Arabia was controlled and sent north. The archaeology confirmed the legend's core truth. This was a place of immense wealth and strategic power, but the most chilling discovery lay at the site's heart. The central part of the fortress had collapsed into a massive limestone sinkhole. The ground had literally opened up. Here was the tangible evidence for the legendary downfall, a sudden geological catastrophe that to the people who witnessed it or who inherited the story could only be explained as an act of divine retribution. The city did not simply fade away, it was consumed. Ubar's discovery is a masterclass in how to read a myth. It shows that the most fantastical elements, a city swallowed by sand as punishment, are often poetic interpretations of real, dramatic events. A sinkhole collapse becomes an act of God. The immense wealth from a single, coveted trade commodity becomes tales of boundless treasure. The story endured because it was rooted in a profound and terrifying reality, a reminder that the very earth that sustains a civilization can also, without warning, reclaim it. The sands did not hide a fiction. They preserved a memory, one finally brought to light by those who dared to treat the legend as a map. The story of discovery has always been written with the tools at hand. For Heinrich Schliemann, it was a literal belief in Homer and a simple pickaxe, a method that, while groundbreaking, was as much about destruction as it was about revelation. Today, the search for legendary cities has undergone a quiet revolution, one not of brute force but of perception. The modern archaeologist's toolkit contains instruments that feel borrowed from science fiction, allowing us to see through solid ground and peer through dense forest canopies without ever breaking the surface. This technological leap has transformed a field once reliant on luck and intuition into a precise, data-driven science, turning the vast, blank spaces on our maps into landscapes rich with hidden history. Consider the impenetrable jungles of Central America. For generations, explorers knew the Maya legends spoke of great cities, but the dense vegetation made finding them a monumental, often impossible task. Then came LiDAR, a laser scanning technology deployed from aircraft. By firing millions of laser pulses at the ground and measuring their return, LiDAR can digitally strip away the thick blanket of trees to reveal the contours of the earth beneath. What it has unveiled is astonishing: entire urban networks, complete with pyramids, causeways, and agricultural terraces, hidden for centuries. These are not just single lost cities, but sprawling metropolises described in local lore, now visible as clear digital models. It is as if we have been given a pair of glasses that allow us to see the ghostly imprint of a civilization still resting beneath the living forest. But the technology goes far beyond seeing through trees. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth, painting a detailed picture of what lies buried, from stone foundations to empty burial chambers. This allows researchers to map a site with incredible accuracy before a single shovel touches the soil, preserving delicate contexts and guiding excavation with surgical precision. Meanwhile, multispectral imaging from satellites or drones can detect subtle differences in plant health or soil moisture. A buried stone wall will stress the plants above it, while an ancient, filled-in ditch will hold more water, making both features visible from the air as faint lines and patterns. These are the crop marks and soil shadows that outline forgotten roads, the very pathways described in ancient texts as leading to a sacred spring or a fortified gate. This non-invasive approach is perhaps the greatest gift of modern technology. It allows us to test the geographical claims of an epic poem or a local legend on a grand scale, surveying entire valleys or coastlines from a desk. We can ask, if the story says a river changed course and doomed a city, can we see the old river channel from space? If it describes a fortress on a specific hill, does ground-penetrating radar show anomalous structures beneath that hilltop? This turns speculation into hypothesis and hypothesis into testable data. The romance of discovery is not diminished by these machines, it is amplified. There is a profound thrill in watching a legend become a series of data points, a shimmering story slowly resolving into the crisp, undeniable lines of a radar map or a LiDAR point cloud. We are no longer just digging for treasure, we are listening to the land itself, using the most advanced tools imaginable to finally hear the whispers of the past it has kept secret for so long. The quest has evolved from a gamble with a shovel to a conversation with the earth, and the stories it is telling us are more incredible than we ever dreamed. Yet sometimes the most potent legends are born not from what was lost, but from what was found and misunderstood. Centuries after the collapse of the Bronze Age, the Greeks told a haunting story of a distant, powerful island kingdom. They spoke of King Minos, a ruler so mighty he commanded the seas, and of a terrifying tribute he demanded from Athens: 7 young men and 7 young women sent across the water to be devoured by a monster kept in a vast, inescapable maze. This was the Labyrinth, home to the Minotaur, a creature half man and half bull. For generations, this was a dark fairy tale, a metaphor for fear and sacrifice. But what if the maze was real and the monster was not a beast but a memory? The key lay on the island of Crete, where local farmers had long known of a massive, mysterious mound littered with ancient pottery. In the early 20th century, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans arrived, purchased the land, and began to dig. What he unearthed was not a simple ruin, but a sprawling, multi-level palace complex of staggering complexity. This was Knossos. Its architecture was bewildering, a labyrinthine network of over 1,000 interconnecting rooms, corridors that doubled back on themselves, staircases leading to sudden dead ends, and storage magazines that seemed to stretch on forever. To the later Greeks, who inherited only fragments of this advanced culture's memory, such a structure could only be described as a maze built to contain something unspeakable. The labyrinth was not a mythical prison, it was likely the palace itself, its sophisticated layout incomprehensible to outsiders centuries after its fall. Evans discovered more than confusing architecture. He found vibrant, life-sized frescoes adorning the walls, depicting a fascinating and dangerous ritual, bull leaping. In these images, athletic individuals, both men and women, are shown gracefully vaulting over the backs of charging bulls. Here was a culture that revered the bull, incorporating its power and symbolism into a central, sacred ceremony. To the later Greeks, who had no context for this practice, the stories of a half-bull creature and a tribute of youths could easily have grown from a distorted memory of these very rituals. The bull was central, and the participants were young, perhaps even sent from abroad as part of a cultural exchange or a diplomatic arrangement that later generations interpreted as a monstrous demand. The civilization Evans revealed, which he named Minoan after the legendary King Minos, was a thalassocracy, a sea power whose influence stretched across the Aegean. Its palaces showed no signs of fortifications, suggesting a secure, peaceful dominance built on trade and naval prowess, exactly as the myths described Minos's rule. But this advanced society met a sudden end. Archaeological evidence points to a colossal volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around the 16th century BC. This event would have triggered tsunamis that devastated the northern coast of Crete, blanketed farmlands in ash, and shattered the Minoan trade networks. The civilization never fully recovered, its power broken and its palaces abandoned. To the people of mainland Greece, looking back across a few hundred years of dark age, the story would have been clear. The mighty kingdom of Minos, with its bull cult and its confusing, monumental palace, was punished by the gods and destroyed in a cataclysm. The legend of the Minotaur is a perfect example of myth as cultural translation. A later society, encountering the physical ruins and the half-remembered stories of a greater, fallen predecessor, wove an explanation from the clues they had. The complex palace became a maze. The sacred bull-leaping ceremony became a monstrous hybrid. The collapse from a natural disaster became divine retribution. The discovery of Knossos does not debunk the myth. It illuminates the profound human process behind it. We see how awe, fear, and the struggle to understand the past can transform history into a story both terrifying and unforgettable. A mountain does not need to be a god to shape a destiny. The very ground beneath our feet, the rivers that carve it, and the seas that border it, are the silent, unchanging characters in every epic. Before a single stone of a legendary city is uncovered, its story is already written in the landscape. These ancient poets were not just storytellers, they were the geographers of their age, encoding vital truths about their world within the rhythm of their verse. To find a lost city, you must first learn to read the map they left behind, a map drawn not with lines but with metaphor and memory. Consider the sheer, imposing cliffs of a narrow strait. To a poet, this isn't just a dangerous passage for ships, it becomes the lair of a monster like Scylla, a personification of the very real terror sailors felt navigating those waters. A fertile river valley, the source of a kingdom's wealth, might be remembered as a garden of the gods, a place of divine abundance. The geography is never incidental, it is the engine of the plot. So when Homer describes the wine-dark sea, he is giving us a specific sensory clue about the deep, rich hues of the Aegean under certain skies. When ancient texts speak of the Pillars of Hercules, they are clearly pointing to the Strait of Gibraltar, the known limit of the Mediterranean world, a boundary that in legend marked the edge of the map. These are not random details, they are anchors. This understanding transforms how researchers begin their search. They start by reconstructing the ancient world as the people who lived in it would have seen it. They trace the ghost roads, the overland trade routes for incense or silk that would have connected wealthy markets. They study pollen cores and soil samples to understand what the climate was like 3,000 years ago, identifying which plains were lush and which were arid. They plot migratory paths of animals or seasonal movements of people, routes that often became highways and later the sites of settlements. A city described as rich in ivory and gold likely sat at a crossroads of major trade networks. A fortress said to be impregnable probably stood on a solitary, defensible hill along a contested border. By layering these geographical and economic models, archaeologists can create a predictive map. It highlights the most logical, strategic places for a powerful society to have taken root. This work is the essential first chapter of any discovery. It turns the vast, empty canvas of a continent into a focused set of coordinates, grounding the beautiful, impossible flight of myth in the solid, measurable truth of the earth. The legend provides the destination, but the landscape always holds the first and most important clue to the journey. The formidable walls of Hattusa rise from the Anatolian plateau, a silent giant whose story was almost erased. For centuries, the Hittite Empire was little more than a ghost, a name mentioned in passing by Egyptian pharaohs and Assyrian kings, a rival so thoroughly vanished it seemed more legend than history. Then, in the early 20th century, archaeologists began to peel back the earth at a site in central Turkey called Boghazköy. They uncovered not just a city, but the nerve center of a forgotten superpower. The scale was staggering, a capital sprawling across a rocky landscape, protected by cyclopean walls and monumental gateways adorned with stone lions and warriors. Hattusa was real, a testament in stone and clay that forced the history books to be rewritten. But the true treasure of Hattusa was not in its architecture, but in its words. Within the palace and temple complexes, excavators discovered vast archives, room after room filled with thousands of baked clay tablets inscribed in precise cuneiform script. This was the imperial filing cabinet of the Hittite world, containing treaties, legal codes, and diplomatic correspondence that revealed a complex empire stretching from the Aegean to the Euphrates. Yet among these administrative records lay something even more precious, fragments of stories that were not their own. The Hittite scribes, in a scholarly tradition of preservation, had meticulously copied and translated literary works from their neighbors and rivals. Most significantly, they possessed their own version of the world's oldest great epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This discovery was a seismic event for understanding legend. Before the libraries of Hattusa were found, our knowledge of Gilgamesh's quest came from much later Assyrian copies. The Hittite versions, centuries older, provided crucial missing pieces and alternative readings, helping scholars reconstruct the epic's original journey. They served as a vital relay station, a cultural crossroads where the Mesopotamian legend was kept alive, studied, and transmitted. This interplay is where the search for legendary cities becomes a conversation across empires. The epic describes Gilgamesh's own city, Uruk, as a place of magnificent walls built by the gods, a city of plazas and temples that seemed the height of human achievement. For a long time, Uruk, though known to exist, felt partly mythical in its grandeur, but finding Hattusa, a contemporary and rival power, provided the essential context. It proved that in that era, around the 2nd millennium BC, such massive, fortified urban centers were not poetic exaggeration, they were the political reality. The Hittites were building capitals with walls that truly touched the sky, with granaries that could feed thousands, and with archives to manage a vast domain. If Hattusa could be that powerful and real, then the description of Uruk's greatness was not a fantasy, it was a report. One legendary city helps us believe in another. The discovery illuminates a fundamental truth about the ancient world. It was a network. Empires knew of each other, traded with each other, fought each other, and crucially, they told stories about each other. A Hittite scribe copying Gilgamesh was not just preserving literature, he was engaging with the cultural identity of a neighboring civilization. The epic's descriptions of distant lands, fearsome monsters, and quests for immortality resonated across linguistic and political borders because they spoke to shared human fears and aspirations. Hattusa's archives show us that legends did not exist in a vacuum. They traveled the same trade routes as spices and lapis lazuli, carried by diplomats, merchants, and captured scribes. Finding one major historical power like the Hittite capital does more than fill a blank spot on the map. It illuminates the entire region. It provides the geopolitical backdrop against which other legendary cities must be understood. The walls of Uruk, as sung by Gilgamesh, were not just a local boast, they were a statement in an ongoing dialogue of power, a message to rivals like the Hittites that here, too, stood a civilization worthy of an epic. But the most famous lost city of all presents a puzzle of a different kind. In two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, the philosopher Plato describes a powerful island nation called Atlantis. He paints a vivid picture of a circular metropolis with concentric rings of water and land, a society of immense wealth and advanced engineering that grew arrogant and was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. For centuries, this story has ignited the human imagination like no other, launching 1,000 expeditions and theories. Yet there is a crucial detail often overlooked in the search. Plato presents Atlantis not as an ancient myth passed down through generations, but as a philosophical device. He uses it as a cautionary tale about the ideal state that succumbs to hubris, a dramatic illustration for his theories on politics and morality. He even provides a specific date for its destruction, 9,000 years before his own time, placing it firmly in the realm of allegory rather than recent history. This creates the central challenge in our quest. We must learn to distinguish between legends that are distorted memories of real places, like Troy or Ubar, and those that are primarily literary or philosophical constructs. Atlantis sits at this difficult crossroads. The endless search for a physical Atlantis, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean, from the North Sea to Antarctica, highlights how desperately we want these stories to be true in a literal sense. Despite tantalizing theories linking it to the Minoan eruption at Thera or to ancient Tartessos in Spain, no conclusive archaeological evidence has ever been found that matches Plato's specific, grandiose description. This is not a failure of archaeology, but perhaps a misunderstanding of the story's purpose. The enduring power of Atlantis teaches us a vital, humbling lesson. Some legendary cities serve a greater purpose as cultural metaphors. They become vessels for our deepest fears about societal collapse, our warnings about pride, and our nostalgia for a lost golden age. Their true value lies not in their latitude and longitude, but in their philosophical and psychological impact. They make us question what makes a civilization great and what causes it to fall. Yet, here is the fascinating twist. The relentless, often fruitless search for a literal Atlantis has, time and again, driven real exploration and led to unintended discoveries. Scholars and adventurers scouring the globe for Plato's island have instead mapped unknown coastlines, studied ancient maritime cultures, and uncovered the ruins of other, completely real societies that were lost to history. The quest for the metaphor has illuminated the reality. So while we may never find the concentric rings of Atlantis on any ocean floor, the search it inspired continues to expand our understanding of the ancient world, proving that even a philosophical ghost can guide us to tangible truth. Gold has a way of telling a story that stone cannot. In the rugged hills of the Peloponnese, a massive stone lintel is crowned by two lionesses, their heads now gone, staring eternally over a landscape they once dominated. This is the Lion Gate, the entrance to Mycenae, and for centuries it was the only visible whisper of a kingdom that had faded into the mists of Homeric verse. The poet sang of Mycenae, rich in gold, the seat of King Agamemnon, the commander of all the Greek forces who sailed to Troy. But was this just another poetic flourish, a name chosen for its rhythmic weight, or was there a real power behind the legend? The man who answered that question was once again Heinrich Schliemann. Flush with the fame of discovering Troy, he turned his zeal and his fortune to this site, convinced that if Troy was real, then the king who besieged it must have had a real home. What he found just inside that Lion Gate would stun the world and give physical form to the Age of Heroes. He uncovered deep, circular shaft graves, and within them, a breathtaking hoard of grave goods. There were finely wrought swords, cups of gold and silver, and most haunting of all, funeral masks of beaten gold placed upon the remains of those laid to rest. Schliemann, holding one exquisite mask, famously telegrammed the king of Greece, declaring he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon. He was wrong in the specifics. The masks were centuries older than the likely time frame of the Trojan War, but he was profoundly right in the broader truth. He had found the material culture of the Achaean kings Homer described. Mycenae was no poet's invention. It was the heavily fortified capital of a warrior aristocracy. The Archaeology paints a picture of a society organized for war and display. The palace complex, built on the highest point, commanded a view of the fertile plain below. Its central feature was a great megaron, a throne room with a central hearth, exactly the kind of hall where Homer's heroes would have feasted and debated. The artifact spoke of long-distance trade, with amber from the Baltic and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan found alongside local treasures. The sheer volume of gold, the sophisticated metalwork, and the evidence of a complex administrative system using Linear B script all pointed to a centralized, wealthy, and powerful state. This was a society that matched the epic descriptions in both its grandeur and its grim priorities. The fortification walls, so thick they were later thought to be built by giants, the Cyclopes, spoke of constant threat and a need for security. The glorification of weapons in art and burial confirmed a culture that valued martial prowess above all, just as the Iliad portrays. The discovery did more than prove a city existed. It provided the crucial link between the Homeric epics and a specific historical period, the Late Bronze Age. Mycenae, along with other contemporary citadels like Pylos and Turins, represented the zenith of a civilization that collapsed around 1200 BC in the widespread turmoil that ended the Bronze Age across the eastern Mediterranean. The epic poems, composed centuries later during a simpler, poorer Iron Age, were looking back at the ruins of this lost world, its massive stone walls and tales of incredible wealth. The stories of Agamemnon and his peers were a cultural memory of that vanished era of palace kingdoms, of warrior elites, and of an interconnected world that suddenly shattered. Mycenae shows us how a legend crystallizes, the historical reality of a powerful, gold-rich citadel, after generations of oral retelling during a dark age, became the archetypal seat of the heroic king. The details might blur, the chronology might compress, but the core truth of its power, its wealth, and its central role in a broader Aegean network was preserved in epic form. We do not have Agamemnon's actual mask, but we have something perhaps more valuable, the undeniable proof that the poets were remembering something real, a glittering, formidable world whose echoes still resonate in the stones of its gates and the gold from its tombs. A civilization does not simply vanish without leaving an echo in the minds of those who come after. The stories we label as legend are often the direct result of a society trying to make sense of the unthinkable. When a cataclysm strikes, whether it is a volcano burying a coastline or an earthquake leveling mighty walls, the physical destruction is only the first chapter. The second, far longer chapter is written in memory. For the survivors and their descendants, the trauma of such an event is too vast, too chaotic, to be recounted as mere history. So the human mind, in its need for order and meaning, begins to weave a narrative. The random violence of nature is transformed into a story with cause and effect. A city is not just destroyed, it is lost, or even better, sunken, taken back by the gods or the sea as a form of divine judgment. This process is not a lie. It is a profound form of psychological preservation. By embedding the raw facts of a disaster into a mythic framework, a culture packages the emotional truth of the event, its shock and its scale, into a portable, memorable story that can be passed down for centuries. The legend becomes the vessel that carries the collective memory of the trauma across the abyss of forgotten years. This is why so many tales of lost cities share a common theme of punishment or pride. It is far easier for a shattered community to process its loss if it can be framed as a moral lesson, a consequence of some flaw, rather than accept the terrifying randomness of a collapsing world. Archaeology provides the sobering evidence for this link between story and catastrophe. A dig might reveal a clear layer of ash, silently testifying to a volcanic winter that ended an era. Foundations of buildings might be found violently sheared apart, pointing to seismic activity. Or, along a now peaceful coast, a stratum of seashells and ocean sediment might be discovered far inland, the unmistakable fingerprint of an ancient tsunami that swept over the land. These are not just geological data points, they are the physical correlates to the legendary descriptions of a city swallowed in a single day and night. When researchers find a once great urban center that shows signs of rapid, violent abandonment, followed by centuries of silence, they are quite literally uncovering the ground zero of a myth. The city of Ubar, consumed by a sinkhole, is a perfect example. The real event, a sudden geological collapse, was interpreted through a cultural lens as a moral reckoning. The story preserved the core truth, the shocking and complete nature of the city's end, while providing a reason for it. This understanding offers investigators a powerful psychological roadmap. When a legend emphasizes divine wrath or a sudden, total engulfment by nature, it is a strong signal that the researchers should be looking for evidence of a sudden, catastrophic event in the archaeological record. The myth is not a barrier to the truth, it is a guide to the kind of truth they will find. It tells them to look for the fire layer, the tsunami deposit, the evidence of panic and rapid flight. By listening to the emotional core of the story, they can begin to ask the right questions of the soil. In this way, the tale of a lost city becomes more than a fanciful mystery. It is a lasting echo of a community's most defining moment of hardship, a memory of resilience forged in the aftermath of ruin, and a beacon that guides us millennia later to understand not just what was lost, but how the human spirit strives to remember. The dense rainforest canopy of Chiapas, Mexico, parts to reveal a city of astonishing grace. Here, the temples of Palenque do not merely stand, they seem to grow from the limestone hills themselves, their roofs crowned with intricate stone combs that pierce the green horizon. This is not a city of brute fortifications, but one of elegant proportions and profound spiritual intent, a place where architecture itself becomes a prayer in stone. For a long time, the silent beauty of Palenque was a riddle. Who built it, and what did they believe? The answers began to emerge not from a single dramatic dig, but from the patient decipherment of the intricate glyphs adorning its walls, a code that would ultimately connect this physical place to one of the great mythological narratives of the Americas, the Popol Vuh. This epic, the sacred book of the K'ich Maya, was written down in the 16th century to preserve a cosmology that was already ancient. It tells the foundational story of creation, of gods molding humans from maize, and most famously of the hero twins Hunahpu and Palenque. Their tale is a grand adventure of ball games, trickery, and a descent into the dark realm of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, where they must outwit the lords of death to ultimately rise again as the sun and the moon. For decades, scholars saw this as a rich but separate tradition, a collection of sacred stories. The ruins of Palenque were studied as impressive archaeology. Yet as experts began to crack the Maya script, a stunning convergence came to light. The historical records carved on Palenque's panels were not just lists of kings and dates, they were narratives consciously framed within this very mythic universe. The rulers of Palenque, with names like Kayanish-Janab Pakal and his son Kayanish-Kan-Bialam, did not simply rule, they performed. The glyphs and accompanying sculptures show them reenacting the journeys of the gods and the hero twins. A king's accession to the throne was depicted as a symbolic rebirth from the underworld. A military victory became a reenactment of the twins' triumph over the lords of Xibalba. Most powerfully, the magnificent Temple of the Inscriptions, built as the tomb for Pakal the Great, is a literal architectural manifestation of this cosmology. His sarcophagus lid is a masterpiece of carving, showing the king at the moment of his death falling down the world tree, not into oblivion, but into the maw of the underworld from which he will be reborn. The temple itself, with its deep interior stairway leading to the burial chamber, is a physical representation of the sacred cave, the portal to Xibalba. At Palenque, history and myth were not separate categories, they were a continuous reality. This discovery redefines our search for legendary cities in the Americas. We are not looking for a single, lost location called Xibalba or a literal mountain of creation. Instead, the Popol Vuh provides the sacred blueprint, the cultural template for what a city should be and mean. It describes a paradigm of sacred urbanism where the ruler is a shaman king, where the city center is a symbolic landscape of sacred mountains, caves, and trees mirroring the cosmos, and where political authority is legitimized through the continuous reenactment of divine myth. Palenque is a breathtakingly perfect physical manifestation of that template, but it was not alone. Across the Maya world, from Tikal to Copan, city-states shared this same worldview, each constructing their own pyramids as sacred mountains, their own ball courts as portals to the underworld, and their own dynastic histories as chapters in an ongoing cosmic story. The legendary city, in this context, is both everywhere and nowhere in particular. It exists as an ideal, a spiritual and architectural model made real in stone and stucco wherever the Maya built. Palenque stands as our most eloquent guide to that model, a place where the glyphs finally allowed the stones to speak in full sentences, revealing that the heroes of the Popol Vuh did not just live in a distant mythical past. Their story was the living script for civilization, performed by kings and etched into the very foundations of a real and breathtaking city. The line between recorded history and sacred narrative in this lush rainforest does not simply blur, it disappears entirely. A quest for origins can become a powerful force, shaping not just how we dig, but what we hope to find. The search for legendary cities has rarely been a neutral, academic pursuit conducted in a cultural vacuum. More often, it is a reflection of the era in which it takes place, charged with the political hopes, national pride, and identity crises of the present. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as modern nation-states were forging their identities, the desire to find a glorious, deep-rooted ancestral homeland became a potent fuel for archaeology. The goal was no longer just to understand the past, but to use it to validate the present, to prove a people's historical depth and claim a timeless right to the land. This powerful motivation could lead to breathtaking discoveries, but it also carried a subtle, distorting influence. When the drive to confirm a national myth overpowers scientific caution, evidence can be pressed into a predetermined narrative. A pottery fragment might be hailed as proof of a divine lineage. A disputed ruin could be claimed as the exclusive heritage of one modern group over another. The legendary city transforms from a historical puzzle into a political trophy, its story curated to serve contemporary agendas rather than reveal an objective truth. We see this dynamic in the early excavations of Heinrich Schliemann, whose passionate desire to prove the historical truth of Homer was inseparable from a romantic German nationalism that revered Greek antiquity as a cultural ancestor. His spectacular finds at Troy and Mycenae were genuine, but his interpretations were often filtered through a lens of heroic idealism, eager to see the face of Agamemnon in every golden mask. This intertwining of national pride and archaeology is not a relic of the past. It continues in debates over sites from the Balkans to the Levant, where ancient layers become contested ground in modern conflicts. The impulse is profoundly human to seek validation in a grand and ancient past, yet acknowledging this bias is the first step toward a clearer vision. It reminds us that the soil holds its own story, one that may not align perfectly with the epic poem or the national curriculum. True archaeological rigor requires setting aside the desired ending to listen to what the evidence actually says, piece by patient piece. The most honest discoveries often complicate our cherished legends, revealing a past that is more interconnected, more nuanced, and more fascinating than any single national story can contain. They show us that while the pride of discovery belongs to a people, the truth of the past belongs to everyone, a common heritage that asks for our humility as much as our curiosity. The ocean floor holds memories of lost shores and vanished kingdoms. Off the sun-baked coast of Gujarat in western India, a team of marine archaeologists descends into the blue-green silence, their search guided by verses from one of the world's longest epics, the Mahabharata. The text describes a magnificent city of unparalleled beauty, Dwarka, said to be the celestial capital of the divine hero Krishna. According to the legend, this city, built by the divine architect Vishwakarma, was a marvel of planning and prosperity, a fortress of righteousness that stood against the sea. And then, following Krishna's departure from the world, the ocean rose and reclaimed it, swallowing the splendor whole. For centuries, this was a powerful spiritual allegory, a story of a divine cycle ending. But what if the waves had also preserved a tangible truth? The underwater explorations near the modern town of Dwarka have yielded something extraordinary. Scattered across the seabed, divers have mapped and recovered structures that tell a story of their own. There are massive stone blocks, the remains of fortification walls, pillars, and anchors, along with pottery and other artifacts that have been dated to a period as early as the 2nd millennium BC. This is not a sunken fairy tale city of gold, but the clear archaeological footprint of a major ancient port settlement. The evidence points to a sophisticated harbor that thrived on maritime trade, a hub that would have been wealthy and influential in its time. The correlation is compelling. The epic describes a glorious coastal city that met its end beneath the waves, and here, just offshore, lies the ruins of a once great port that was indeed inundated, likely due to a combination of rising sea levels and seismic activity common to the region. The geological record shows that shorelines have shifted dramatically here over millennia. While a direct, incontrovertible link to the Krishna of the Mahabharata remains in the realm of faith and scholarly debate, the physical discovery bridges the gap between myth and geological history. It demonstrates that the core narrative of a prosperous city succumbing to the ocean is not pure invention, but aligns with a recurring reality of the ancient world. The story preserved in the epic likely encapsulates a cultural memory of a traumatic, real event, the catastrophic loss of a beloved homeland to the encroaching sea. This ongoing search transforms our understanding of flood myths worldwide. From the biblical deluge to the sinking of Atlantis, stories of great inundations are a global phenomenon. Dwarka offers a tangible case study. Maritime archaeology is now allowing us to test these stories against the submerged landscape, to find the harbors and coastal settlements that our ancestors had to abandon as waters rose. Each discovered anchor or wall is a data point in a much larger story of human adaptation and memory. The legend of a city returned to the sea becomes a poignant metaphor for the relentless dialogue between human civilization and the natural world, a reminder written not on parchment, but on the silent, sandy floor of the ocean itself. The words of an epic are not a monolith, but a living document shaped by countless voices. Before a single trowel touches the earth, another kind of excavation takes place in quiet libraries and digital archives, where scholars perform a delicate surgery on the text itself. This is philology, the meticulous study of language through historical texts, and it serves as archaeology's essential first map. By comparing different manuscript versions of a story, sometimes separated by centuries and continents, these researchers can trace how a city's description evolved over time. The goal is to peel back the layers of poetic invention, the grand similes and divine interventions added by generations of bards, to uncover the oldest, most stable core of the narrative. This core often holds the most promising clues to historical reality. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance. Scholars have painstakingly assembled it from fragments found across Mesopotamia, from the royal libraries of Nineveh to the school tablets of Babylon. By comparing the older Sumerian versions of the tales with the later, standardized Akkadian epic, they can identify which elements are foundational. The wild, untamed figure of Enkidu and the quest for immortality are ancient, but certain specific descriptions of Uruk's walls or its temples might become more elaborate in later copies. The philologist's work is to spot these anachronisms, the details that reflect the world of the scribe who copied the text, not the world of the original story. A mention of a type of armor or a style of ship that was not invented until centuries after the epic's setting is a clear sign of a later addition. By filtering out these layers, scholars can isolate the most consistent geographical and cultural details, the ones that persist across versions and therefore might point to a genuine memory. This method shines brilliantly with Homer's Iliad, particularly in its famous catalogue of ships. This lengthy passage is essentially a list of the Greek kingdoms that sent forces to Troy, detailing their leaders and the number of ships they contributed. To many, it might seem like a poetic inventory, a rhythmic way to build grandeur. But philologists and historians, by analyzing the place names and their descriptions, have found that this catalogue maps remarkably well onto the political geography of late Bronze Age Greece, the world of the Mycenaean palaces. It mentions kingdoms and towns that were powerful centers in the 14th or 13th century BC, but had faded into obscurity by Homer's time in the 8th century. The poet, or the tradition he inherited, was recalling a political landscape that had been lost for hundreds of years. This was not a contemporary map, but an ancient one preserved in verse. Such philological groundwork transforms a legend from a vague story into a specific, testable hypothesis. It tells the archaeologist, if you are looking for a historical Troy, look for a city that controlled trade through the Dardanelles around this time. If you are looking for the world of the catalogue of ships, look for Mycenaean palace complexes in these specific regions of Greece. The text becomes a series of predictions written in metaphor. This careful literary analysis reminds us that the search for a legendary city is a partnership between the humanities and the sciences. One discipline asks what the story says and how it came to be, while the other goes into the field to see if the earth agrees. Together, they perform a kind of triangulation across time, using the fragile, enduring power of words to locate the indelible imprint of stone. the scale of a city can become its own kind of legend. In the biblical book of Jonah, the prophet is commanded to go to Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and cry out against its wickedness. He famously resists, leading to the well-known episode with the great fish, but when he finally arrives, the text offers a staggering detail. It describes Nineveh as an exceedingly great city, a journey of 3 days across. For centuries, readers interpreted this as a metaphor, a poetic way of saying the city's influence or its sin was vast. It seemed an impossible, almost mythical scale for an ancient metropolis. That was until archaeologists began to peel back the earth on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, opposite modern-day Mosul in Iraq. What they uncovered was not a metaphor but a measurement. The real Nineveh was a colossal urban sprawl enclosed by nearly 8 miles of formidable walls, dotted with 15 monumental gates. To walk from one end of the city to the other would indeed have taken the better part of 3 days. The biblical description was not exaggeration, it was reportage. The discovery of Nineveh stands as a monumental lesson in how religious texts can preserve precise geographical truths, their spiritual messages anchored in the bedrock of historical reality. Walking through the reconstructed gates of Nineveh today, even in replica, you feel the weight of its ancient power. This was the nerve center of an empire that dominated the Near East through a formidable combination of military innovation and administrative control. The palaces excavated here, particularly the magnificent palace of King Sennacherib, were adorned with miles of detailed stone reliefs. These carvings did not hide the empire's nature, they celebrated it, depicting scenes of conquest, siege warfare, and the transportation of colossal statues and tribute from vanquished lands. The city's reputation for might, and for the hardship it could impose on others, was etched in stone for all to see, a reputation that clearly echoed down the centuries to the writers of the Hebrew scriptures. Yet within this very city, archaeologists made another find that complicated the simple narrative of brute force. In the ruins of the palace of Ashurbanipal, Sennacherib's grandson, they uncovered a library. Not a small collection, but a vast archive of over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments, meticulously organized. This was not a trophy room, it was a university. The library held the entire intellectual inheritance of Mesopotamia, epic poems like Gilgamesh, scientific texts, legal codes, and omens. It revealed an Assyria that was not merely a destroyer of cities, but a preserver of knowledge, a civilization with a profound scholarly tradition. This duality is precisely what makes the biblical story of Jonah so resonant, and why the archaeological confirmation of Nineveh's reality gives the tale such profound depth. The story is not really about a man in a fish. It is a moral exploration of repentance, divine mercy, and the potential for change, even within the heart of what seems an irredeemable enemy. Jonah is sent to warn the Assyrians, the very architects of his people's fears, that their city will be overthrown in 40 days. To his dismay, they listen. The king of Nineveh, from his throne in that very palace, issues a proclamation for everyone, even the animals, to fast and wear sackcloth, to turn from their destructive path. And the city is spared. The narrative's power hinges on this startling act of collective humility from history's most formidable military power. Archaeology cannot prove that specific event, of course, but it provides the essential stage for it. It confirms the existence of the powerful king, the awe-inspiring scale of the city that could humble itself, and the sophisticated culture capable of understanding a prophetic warning. The legend transcends the physical city, but it needs the physical city to ground its transformative message. The stones of Nineveh tell us the place was real and powerful. The story of Jonah tells us that its legacy and the hope for its redemption became a cornerstone of ethical thought, ensuring that this capital of empire would be remembered not only for its walls and its terror, but for its capacity in the realm of story to choose a different path. A trowel can uncover more than pottery and stone. It can awaken a sleeping story that still holds the power to define a people. When the legendary city you seek is not a forgotten ruin, but a living, beating heart of faith for millions today, the archaeologist's role transforms completely. This is the profound ethical frontier of the search, where science meets sacred ground, and every layer of soil is also a layer of meaning. Sites like Ayodhya in India, revered as the birthplace of the deity Rama, or the ancient layers of Jerusalem, sacred to three major world religions, are not merely historical puzzles. They are active symbols, places where legend is not a memory but a present-day identity. To dig here is to enter a conversation that has been ongoing for millennia, and the responsibility is immense. The goal is no longer simply to prove a legend true or false, but to understand how the physical past intertwines with enduring belief, and to do so with a humility that honors both. The process becomes as much about diplomacy and deep respect as it is about stratigraphy and carbon dating. Modern protocols now insist that excavations in such sensitive contexts involve local communities and religious custodians from the very beginning. This collaboration is not a hurdle, but a vital source of insight and a safeguard against unintended harm. Transparent methodology is paramount, with findings shared openly to prevent speculation from filling the void. The question shifts from what can we find to how can we learn without causing hurt. This ethical dimension ensures that the recovery of the past does not come at the cost of the present. It recognizes that a temple wall or an ancient gate might be both an archaeological feature and a focal point for prayer, both a historical fact and an article of faith. The work becomes an act of careful listening, where the scientific narrative and the living tradition are allowed to speak to each other. In this delicate space, a discovery is not a trophy to be claimed by one group, but a piece of a shared human story that must be handled with collective care. The ultimate success is measured not just in published papers, but in whether the excavation deepens understanding and fosters respect, allowing the legendary city to continue its sacred role in the modern world, now enriched by a new chapter of knowledge. Beyond the known world, where the Mediterranean Sea met the great outer ocean, Greek poets and historians spoke of a realm of almost unimaginable wealth. Past the Pillars of Hercules in the mysterious west lay Tartessos. Herodotus described it as a kingdom rich beyond measure, a land where rivers of silver flowed and its people traded with a wisdom that impressed even the savvy Phoenicians. For centuries, this was the ultimate edge of the map story, a shimmering mirage of prosperity just out of reach, a legend born from sailors' tales and the Greek imagination straining at the limits of its geography. If Troy was a memory of war, Tartessos was a dream of treasure, a symbol of what lay waiting for those brave enough to sail off the chart. But was it only a dream? The search would lead us not to our isolated fairy tale kingdom, but to the sun-drenched marshes of southern Spain, to the winding course of the Guadalquivir River. Here, archaeologists began to find whispers of something extraordinary. A site known as Casado de los Moros emerged not as a lone fortress, but as the heart of a complex society. The evidence was not in glittering hoards of gold, but in the sturdy, practical remains of industry and connection. They uncovered slag heaps and evidence of sophisticated metalworking, proof of a civilization built on the rich mineral resources of the Iberian Peninsula, the very silver and copper that would have fueled ancient economies. This was no insular tribe, it was a hub. The pottery told a story of constant exchange, with distinctive Phoenician amphorae resting beside local styles. Tartessos was not a mythic island, it was a real, powerful trading partner, a gateway where the advanced mercantile culture of the Phoenician East met the mineral wealth of the Atlantic West. The most compelling clue, however, came in the form of stone. researchers began to unearth carved stelae, stone slabs inscribed with a script unlike any other in the region. It was neither purely Phoenician nor a simple local symbol system, but a unique hybrid writing that suggested a sophisticated society with its own administrative and possibly sacred language. This was the fingerprint of a distinct culture, exactly what the classical accounts had hinted at, a people with their own identity shaped by, but not swallowed by, outside influence. The discovery redefines the legend completely. Tartessos was not a Greek fantasy, it was a Phoenician reality, a colony or partner so successful and distant it entered Greek lore as a paradisiacal kingdom. The fabulous wealth was real, born from control over precious metals. The wisdom was real, a cultural synthesis born of being a crossroads. Its location beyond the Pillars of Hercules was not a poetic device, but a simple fact of geography from a Greek perspective. This legendary city shows us how myths are born from economic truth. When a civilization sits at the nexus of a vital trade network, controlling a resource everyone else craves, stories of its grandeur will travel back along the trade routes, growing with each retelling. The silver of Tartessos became rivers of silver. Its prosperous port became a city of unimaginable splendor. The reality, though perhaps less fantastical, is in many ways more impressive. It reveals a dynamic, creative culture that forged its own identity in the crucible of international exchange. A civilization whose memory endured not because it was magical, but because it was essential to the ancient world's economy. Tartessos proves that sometimes the most legendary cities are not lost to disaster, but simply forgotten when the trade routes shift, waiting for us to rediscover them not as fairy tales, but as the powerful, pragmatic engines of history they truly were. Yet for every Troy or Ubar found, there are searches that end only in silence. The dense jungles of the Amazon have swallowed countless expeditions hunting for El Dorado, the city of gold. Medieval maps once labeled vast swaths of Africa and Asia with the hopeful location of the kingdom of Prester John, a mythical Christian ruler of immense wealth and power. These quests burn through fortunes and lives, driven by an obsession that often outstripped reason. They found no golden cities, no hidden Christian utopias. In a purely physical sense, they were profound failures, but to dismiss them as mere folly is to miss their deeper, more humbling lesson for our entire search. Not every story etched into legend has a street plan waiting to be uncovered. The absence of evidence is itself a powerful form of evidence. It forces us to ask a different, more sophisticated question, not where is this city, but why did we believe it was here in the first place? The relentless pursuit of El Dorado, for instance, tells us less about the Amazon and more about the conquistador mind, a worldview that projected European desires for wealth onto an unknown landscape, interpreting native stories of ritual gold offerings as directions to a literal metropolis. The legend was a mirror reflecting the seeker's own obsessions back at them. These fruitless journeys, however, were never truly empty. In scrambling through uncharted river systems for El Dorado, explorers mapped continents. In searching for Prester John's realm, European contact with Ethiopia was deepened, revealing a real and ancient Christian kingdom, though not the mythical one of the stories. Each failed quest expanded the known world, catalogued new species, and documented cultures entirely unrelated to the original goal. They slowly, painfully, helped define the boundaries of the possible. They taught us to distinguish between a legend that is a distorted memory of a real place and a legend that is a purely symbolic or psychological construct, a societal dream or a fear made manifest. The value of this long, often frustrating history is not solely in finding. It is in the rigorous process of questioning that the search demands. It forces us to refine our methods, to temper romance with skepticism, and to better understand the intricate dance between human memory and imagination. Sometimes the most important discovery is learning with respect when to stop digging in the earth and start digging deeper into the story itself. The true magic of Hisarlik lies not in a single golden treasure, but in the dirt itself. When archaeologists cut into the Great Mound, they did not find one lost city waiting to be revealed. They found 9, layer upon layer, each one a complete chapter in a story spanning over 4,000 years, a vertical timeline of human ambition, disaster, and stubborn resilience. This stratigraphy, the careful study of these successive levels, transforms the hill from a simple backdrop for Homer's war into a profound library of stone and soil. The earliest settlement, Troy I, was a small fortress from the early Bronze Age. Then, through centuries, each generation built upon the rubble of the last, expanding, fortifying, and sometimes completely reinventing the community atop the hill. Troy too showed evidence of great wealth and a catastrophic fire. Troy VI displayed imposing walls and a prosperity that ended in a massive earthquake. The layer Schliemann so desperately sought, and initially misidentified, was likely Troy 7a, a rebuilt version showing clear signs of violent conflict and burning that aligns hauntingly well with the epic's time frame. But the story did not end there. The site was rebuilt again, becoming a bustling Greco-Roman city known as Ilium, visited by Alexander the Great and later by tourists seeking the legendary battleground. This continuous narrative of rise, fall, and rebirth reveals a stunning truth about legendary places. A single geographical location can be a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped clean and written over again and again, accumulating multiple identities across the ages. The memory preserved in Homer's Iliad might not belong to just one of these layers, but could be a powerful fusion, a cultural echo blending the grandeur of Troy VI with the traumatic destruction of Troy 7a. Different eras of the mound's long life could have inspired different strands of local folklore, stories that eventually wove together into the single epic tapestry we know today. This teaches us that the search for a legendary city is rarely about finding a static, frozen moment. It is about untangling a braid of histories. The name Troy did not vanish, it simply sank into the earth, waiting for a later people to build their own stories upon its foundations. The physical location evolved, its name and function changing with each new civilization that claimed it, yet the memory of its most glorious or most tragic era persisted in song. Hisarlik shows us that a legend is not a snapshot, but a distillation, a brilliant and lasting memory drawn from the deep, complex well of a place's entire lived experience. The layers of Hisarlik teach us that every discovery is a beginning, not an end. The quest itself is evolving, moving beyond the lone scholar with a map and a shovel into a collaborative future powered by technologies that feel like they belong in a science fiction novel. The next frontiers in the search for legendary cities are being drawn not on parchment, but in lines of code and on spectral graphs. Imagine an artificial intelligence trained on every known ancient text from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the logs of medieval travelers, cross-referencing thousands of fragmented descriptions in moments. This machine learning system could identify forgotten patterns, connecting a poetic mention of a mountain shaped like a lion's head in one epic to a geologist's survey of a specific landform in another, proposing locations no human researcher could have correlated alone. Simultaneously, satellites equipped with hyperspectral imaging will peer at our planet with ever sharper eyes, detecting the chemical signatures of ancient human activity, the ghost of a long-filled-in moat or the faint residue of a settlement's waste, invisible to every other form of light. The search is becoming a symphony of data where every discipline contributes a vital note. Isotopic analysis, for instance, is turning humble artifacts into passports. By studying the unique chemical fingerprints locked inside a pottery shard or a bronze tool, Scientists can now trace the clay to its specific quarry or the metal ore to its distant mine, mapping ancient trade routes with astonishing precision. This tells us not just where a city was, but how far its influence reached, revealing networks of connection that turn a solitary legend into a node in a global story. Perhaps the most tantalizing frontier lies beneath the waves, particularly in places like the Black Sea, where anoxic, oxygen-free waters may preserve wooden structures and organic materials for thousands of years beyond normal limits. Here, autonomous underwater vehicles and advanced sonar are probing for submerged Neolithic settlements, towns that were flooded by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. These are places so ancient they predate writing itself, cities that became legendary not through epic poems, but through their sheer, silent antiquity, their stories waiting in the deep, preserved in a timeless murk. This forward-looking perspective ensures the quest remains forever vibrant. Future archaeologists may use these tools to test legends we have not yet even thought to question, stories lingering in obscure oral traditions or coded into petroglyphs we cannot yet fully read. They may discover that our current map of the ancient world is merely a rough sketch, with entire chapters of human civilization still missing, waiting to be recovered from beneath a desert dune or a jungle floor. The romance of discovery is not being automated away, it is being amplified. The fundamental human urge to find, to understand our origins, is now armed with tools that allow us to listen more carefully to the whispers of the past than ever before. The line between myth and history will grow thinner still as we learn to ask better questions of both our stories and our soil. Sometimes a legend is born not from what a culture built, but from what it gave away. High in the Colombian Andes, where mist clings to the mountains, the Muisca people practiced a ceremony of breathtaking symbolism. When a new chief rose to power, he journeyed to the sacred circular lake of Guatavita. There, on a ceremonial raft, his body was entirely covered in adhesive resin and then dusted with fine gold, transforming him into a living, shimmering sun god. As he stood at the center of this glittering reflection, attendants piled the raft with offerings of gold and emeralds, and then, in a moment of profound release, these treasures were cast into the deep, dark waters. This was not a display of wealth for wealth's sake. It was a sacred transaction, an offering to the gods to ensure balance, fertility, and a rightful reign. The gold was not hoarded, it was returned to the earth from which it came, to the Muisca. This was the heart of their spiritual and political order. To the Spanish conquistadors who later heard garbled accounts of the ritual, it was a tantalizing clue to something else entirely. Their minds, conditioned by tales of the 7 cities of gold and driven by insatiable greed, performed a tragic act of translation. They took the image of the Golden Man, El Dorado in Spanish, and extrapolated it into a geography of fantasy. If one man could be covered in gold, they reasoned, then his city must be paved with it. The ritual became a place, the offering became a treasury, and the spiritual act became a map to plunder. Thus, the phantom city of El Dorado was born in the European imagination, a mirage that would lure countless expeditions to their doom in the jungles and mountains of South America. Archaeology, of course, has found no such metropolis of gold, but what it has uncovered is infinitely more valuable: the sophisticated reality of the Muisca Confederation itself. Excavations have revealed a complex society of farmers, traders, and master artisans. Their gold work, studied in museums today, is not the crude bullion the Spanish sought, but art of exquisite beauty, thin foils and intricate alloys shaped into pendants, masks, and votive figures depicting gods and animals. These objects were not currency, they were sacred. They confirm the material truth at the legend's source, the profound skill and cultural significance that made the Guatavita ritual possible. The conquistadors saw only the metal, missing the meaning entirely. This case stands as a perfect, poignant illustration of how legendary cities are sometimes catastrophic misunderstandings. A foreign culture's ritual, resource, or custom is observed through a lens of desire and filtered through a different worldview. The reality, a ceremony of gold, dust, and water, is stretched and contorted by an outsider's imagination into a phantom geography, a city of impossible riches. The truth is not a lost capital waiting to be looted, but a living culture with its own logic and beauty, one that used its most precious material not to build walls but to speak to the divine. El Dorado was never a place on a map. It was a moment on a lake, a man becoming a symbol, and an offering meant to vanish. The tragedy of the legend is that in desperately searching for a city of gold, the seekers blinded themselves to the golden civilization that was right in front of them all along. The final discovery is not a single artifact, but the story it allows us to tell. After the satellite imagery has been analyzed, the pottery shards catalogued, and the ancient verses parsed, a more profound work begins. This is the quiet art of synthesis, the patient weaving of disparate threads into a coherent tapestry of the past. A line from an epic poem finds its echo in the layout of a palace foundation. The chemical signature in a piece of bronze confirms a trade route hinted at in a merchant's ledger. A layer of tsunami sand aligns with a legend of a city swallowed by the sea. Each piece of evidence is a point of light, and the historian's task is to connect them, drawing the constellation of a lost civilization. The goal transcends simply putting a name on a map. It is about understanding the heartbeat of the society that lived there, why their memory was worth preserving in song, and how that memory transformed across generations. This requires a particular kind of intellectual humility. We must celebrate where the evidence forms a solid picture, a wall of facts, but we must also honestly acknowledge the gaps, the empty spaces where only informed speculation, clearly labeled as such, can tentatively bridge the silence. We build not with absolute certainty, but with the best possible narrative that respects all the clues. The result is a history far richer than any list of kings or inventory of treasures. It is a living portrait that honors both the hard truth of the archaeological record and the deep human need to mythologize our own journey. We see not just a city that fell, but a people who remembered its fall as a warning. We see not just a prosperous port, but a community whose wealth became the stuff of dreams for distant cultures. This synthesis completes the sacred circle of the quest. It takes the physical proof, the silent testimony of the earth, and reunites it with the emotional truth carried for centuries in story. The epic gives meaning to the excavation, and the excavation gives a foundation to the epic. They are not rivals but partners in a single, endless conversation about who we were, and in remembering those lost cities, we ultimately remember something enduring about ourselves. The stones we find give voice to the stories we have always told. Our journey from the pages of ancient epics to the careful trenches of the archaeological dig reveals a profound and beautiful truth. Our ancestors' greatest stories were not spun from thin air, but anchored in the real stones of real cities, in the geography they walked and the walls they built. This search is about far more than just matching a name to a ruin. It is a lesson in the incredible resilience of cultural memory, a testament to the quiet persistence of human experience across millennia. A people may scatter, a language may fade, but the memory of a great river, a fallen tower, or a golden age can endure, carried forward in the only vessel strong enough to survive the collapse of empires, the story itself. It is also a celebration of modern ingenuity, of how we have learned to listen. We no longer just dig, we listen with satellites, with lasers, with chemical signatures in the soil. We have become translators, learning to decode the symbolic language of the past, to distinguish the poetic flourish from the geographical clue. This partnership between the ancient bard and the modern scientist builds a bridge where we once saw only a wall. The divide between myth and history is not a chasm, but a connection carefully constructed piece by piece through curiosity, respect, and evidence. Look at the places we have found, from the strategic citadel of Troy to the sunken piers of Dwarka, from the caravanserai of Ubar consumed by the earth to the labyrinthine palace of Knossos. Each one began as a shimmering legend and ended as a testament to a real human world, with all its ambition, its artistry, and its vulnerability. These discoveries do not rob the stories of their magic, they deepen it. They root our most soaring tales in the shared ground of human experience. Let this exploration change how you hear an old tale. The next time you encounter a legend of a lost city or a sunken kingdom, listen not for literal truth, but for the echo of a real place, a real event, a real people reaching out across time. That story you have always loved may be more than a fantasy. It may be an invitation, a map waiting for its key. The next great discovery might not be in some distant, unexplored jungle, but waiting just beneath the surface of a favorite epic, in a line of poetry we are only now learning how to truly read. We would love to hear what legendary city from story or song captures your imagination the most. Share your favorite in the comments below and subscribe to continue this shared adventure into the endless mysteries of our past.